it was fascinating because even as a little kid, I used to read the credits on shows, and I would note the makeup artists in the credits. And even at a young age, I would try to reach out to these people. So I would say to my father, okay, now how do I get in touch with this person? I want to send them a letter. Very much like in my short story I wrote. So,
Truly.
and I actually did do that kind of stuff. And sometimes I'd get a response, sometimes I wouldn't. Again, because a little kid, asking questions that no one understands, probably, unless you're a little kid taking that in. But, that was another aspect of me trying to understand, I guess, what Hollywood was, and seeing the programming, again, limited programming that I did see as a little kid, and comprehending it.
So excited for you to join me this week on the Fifi Uncensored podcast with my guest, Emmy Award-winning Brad Look, who bar none is one of the most humble, most educated, most talented, and most gracious makeup artists I've ever had the pleasure of working with. I cannot wait for you to sit down and hear this episode. As anyone who's ever wanted to explore Hollywood, becoming a makeup artist, what it's like, what the thoughts are behind the scenes, and the importance of artistry and education, Brad is just a joy to sit down and talk with. I cannot wait for you to listen. So pull up that chair, grab that coffee and cannoli, because here we go. Brad, look, you're originally from Peoria, Illinois.
Correct.
You are an award-winning makeup artist here in Los Angeles. And I wanted to start with asking you, as Brad the little boy, did you imagine yourself becoming who you become? An award-winning makeup artist.
Well, I don't think anyone starts off knowing where they might end up. I mean, there's hopes and dreams and all of that, but the reality is no one knows for sure, because unfortunately everyone comes from different walks of life, and you just don't know how things are going to work out the way they are.
Right. And as a little boy, what were you dreaming about?
Well, growing up in Illinois, I mean, which is the farthest thing away from Hollywood as you could ever get. Let's face it, Hollywood was a very elusive thing as far as in my mind as a kid. The only thing I could associate with was programs that, I was watching on at that time, such as Flipper, The Outer Limits, Twilight Zone, Star Trek came in later. So, I mean, those were the things that as a kid I was growing up with, which is very different for kids today. Kids today, there's so much at their fingertips, between computers and everything that you can find on internet and everything else. There was none of that growing up. I mean, we had the 3 channels where I grew up. We didn't even have PBS at that time yet, because PBS hasn't even been developed yet. So, I mean, you had ABC, NBC, and CBS, and that was your entire realm of entertainment. And I don't know if you did this, but in our household, since we only had one television, it was a black and white television, not even color. Our whole schedule as a family was set around the shows that we would watch together. Unlike today, where you have everyone with their own televisions and they're all over the place, or they're on their computer. Again, back then times were simpler. So the family hour was kind of the big thing.
Did your parents play music in the household, or go to any local theater, or was reading books, or what was exposure in the arts in your household like?
We had music. My parents had a stereo, like I think most households did. And they had the standard records at that point, LPs, again, not CDs and everything else that we have now. And, most of them were either show tunes or they were music. My father enjoyed big band music and also jazz. So we had some of that. We did have books in the house. It's interesting at that time, growing up in the early 60s, that was kind of the whole rise, the interest in UFOs and everything. So my mother would have some books on UFOs and programs that catered to that, such as The Outer Limits and Twilight Zone, were always kind of exciting because they kind of gave you a glimpse at what might be going on with UFOs.
Well, so that's fascinating. So was it your mom's direct interest in UFOs and her curiosity, or was it?
No, it was primarily my mother's. My father, he worked at Caterpillar in data processing, so he was more logical and everything else. And so, the idea of UFOs was kind of out there and not really considered all that logical at the time. And because of the speculative issue of UFOs, I think that's why my father didn't really put much credence in it, but my mother thought it was kind of fascinating. And of course, you had shows back then that kind of played that up.
Oh, absolutely. And it's interesting that your father was so analytical and your mom was so ethereally in the fantastical kind of mindset that I see you as a product of the two of them having both elements in who you are, because you're so detail oriented and so precision and so logical of a thinker in my observation, but application and what projects you've been aligned with over the years. I think it's interesting how it kind of collaboratively is part of who and you came from, without you in the sense of maybe realizing consciously that would become what you and who you become.
Well, definitely. I'm an amalgamation of both parents, as most people are. Although some kids might lean or have leniencies, leaning towards either the mother's side of the family or the father's side of the family. I guess because of my parents being what they were, it's a little of both.
So were your parents supportive of you being a dreamer?
You kind of yes and no. It's kind of, and we'll get into this later, I guess, when we discuss the story I wrote. The character in my story is very much based on my father. So yes and no. As most parents would be, they're okay with it up to a point, but then the reality is, okay, so these dreams and aspirations you have, are they even credible enough that you can actually, a quote, as my father would say, make a living at it? As I think
right. So what was the youngest age that you remember having a dream that you wanted to pursue, whether it was getting a toy or doing an act or being a part of something? What comes to mind when I ask you that question?
it's interesting. As a kid, I was very aware of makeup in watching programs. As far as lipsticks, eyeshadow, blush, unusual makeup because of shows like Outer Limits and Twilight Zone and all of those. So at a very young age, I was very interested in those aspects, as well as drawing, comic strips, things like that. We didn't have in my household, because my father didn't agree with it, we didn't have comic books. So closest I got to any kind of issues with that would be like the Sunday comics and being able to look at that. And that was very much a big interest as far as being able to draw things I would see in the local newspapers and stuff like that. So, but
when you were starting to be of interest in makeup, had your parents in your household, was it still the one black and white television, or had your parents now gotten a color television that made your brain go into that mindset?
No, we didn't get a color TV until many years later. So we didn't have our television, for the most part, was a black and white TV which was always interesting because I would be watching these shows such as Flipper and some others that would say, next and in color. And I'm like, color, where's the color? It's all black and white still. In my mind, I didn't understand that you had to have a different set for color. Again, I was a little kid.
Sure.
So, when they would make those announcements right before a program, and you would see, like the NBC Peacock, where it would come up and it's all doing that. It's like, now it's a color. It's like, still looks like it's black and white to me. So again, as a kid growing up, and my parents, there was my oldest sister, Cindy, my oldest brother, Rusty, then there was me and Craig. And I think Andrew had just come. So, there was 5 kids. And my father was working at Caterpillar, working some pretty long hours just to support a family, with 5 kids. So, my father was always cash poor and all that because of all these mouths to feed and clothe and put into school. So, that's why we didn't have a color television set for quite some time. So,
oh yeah. And frankly, they didn't come into access until the 60s. It was, I think, more or less the late 60s, because I do remember, no, I take that back, it was the early 60s. I remember my family getting a color television. I feel like it was somewhere between 60, it had to have been somewhere between 66, 67, because it was before we moved to our next home. So we already had it in our first home as children, because the first thing I saw in color were the Flintstones. And I was like on the edge of my seat, like in front of the television, just like, oh my God, this is amazing. And I loved I loved the Flintstones to begin with. I don't even remember it in black and white, but clearly my brain went, oh my God, there's been a change and I love it. And, so I can only imagine by you reading Seen in Color, where your imagination, with you as gifted as you are with color, being a creator, being a visionary, what that must have done to your little boy brain of what is that and what does that look like?
Well, and again, we did not have a color television for quite some time. I was born in 1959. So I was just before the 60s. Mm-hmm. And when the 60s came in, I'd be watching the evening news, with my parents and stuff. And, they would be talking about the guerrilla warfare and stuff like that in the war. And as a kid, I'm thinking, wow, I want to see this. They have guerrillas running around with guns? Because I'm thinking as a little kid, I was only in the first or second grade. So at that time, we were in Pekin, Illinois. So in Pekin, Illinois, I had no idea even what that was. I remember even one day growing up in this small little town in central Illinois, and the local sheriffs had a new siren. And I would hear that siren in the distance, and we're all thinking we're getting invaded by UFOs because we're hearing this really weird siren. And all of us kids and even some of the neighbors are like freaking out because we don't know what that is. Because we're not seeing the vehicle, we're just hearing the sound. And it was
that's a very Wellian circumstance, and Orson, that's a very Wellian radio moment circumstance, like imagining something is happening that isn't, but you think it is. It's like, is this life imitating art mentality?
Right. And there was a very well-known episode on Twilight Zone, The Monsters That Do on Maple Street. Mm-hmm. And it was very much like that because we're all coming out of our houses going, what the hell's going on? Because none of us have any idea. As a kid growing up, they would show on the TV, that they would do the test pattern with the warning, the national warning. And I always thought there might be coming a day when that national warning won't be a test anymore. And it'll be an actual real warning of something going on. And that's what's going to happen.
Right. Well, and it's interesting because I'm a couple of years younger than you are, but I remember the impact of those moments of, for the next 30 seconds, this will be a test. And I remember also growing up in Illinois, the assimilation to that test would, it was probably a combination of things. There was probably the John F. Kennedy announcement of his being killed in 1963. And though you at that point were maybe 3-4 years old, I was a baby, as my mom would put it. I was, in the kitchen with her in my bassinet or whatever, and she was washing dishes and heard the news on the radio, because the radio was in the kitchen, and literally like dropped the dishes and screamed and cried all at the same time. And supposedly I, as a little baby, was this really good little baby that all of a sudden was like alarmed by my mother's reaction. I would imagine in our childhood, there were those moments, John F. Kennedy, Martin Luther King, those were those emergency 30-second, and or where we lived, a tornado coming through, right?
Sure.
Today, our breaking news is every other moment, whether it's a mass shooting, a car chase, a person who's died, whatever. Like it's a whole nother, like it's catapulted, the trajectory is into a whole nother. And it's like what we as children were so innocent, like a new siren. Was that a UFO coming? How is this, or the Twilight Zone mentality. Today, anybody under a certain age, and it's not about aging or ageism or different times, it's just to show in a very short amount of time how much we have all evolved on a certain level with what we're exposed to, and an amount of information that we're exposed to, and how we react and how it affects. And it's a fascinating innocence that we came from, which is why dreaming in your imagination where you were from and where you came from and what your exposure was, how that developed you. So at what point in your elementary or middle school or high school did you start to put more things together through your, were you illustrating? Were you performing? Were you doing, what were you doing that evolved that?
Well, I mean, recalling as a kid, the whole idea of what in my mind as a kid can assimilate with the idea of makeup. I recall at a very young age. I mean, I was in kindergarten and first grade. I would get a coloring book, and if they had a picture of a woman there, I actually took the crayons out and would color the lips in like lipstick. I put a base on it, put blush on it, eyeshadow. And I remember mentioning that one time when someone was asking me about my earliest, inclinations with makeup and the idea of it. And I remember mentioning that, and my mother's like, she goes, yeah, I remember you doing that. She says, you were kind of an odd little kid because you, even though you didn't have makeup, you used your crayons as if they were makeup tools. And so I remember doing that as a kid. So, I mean, I was consciously aware of makeup. I would see my mother putting on makeup, or I'd see ads for makeup on TV, again, all black and white. So again, my perception of makeup was by seeing people around me. So as opposed to the television. So that was probably one of my earliest understandings of makeup. And it was fascinating because even as a little kid, I used to read the credits on shows, and I would note the makeup artists in the credits. And even at a young age, I would try to reach out to these people. I would say to my father, okay, now how do I get in touch with this person? I want to send them a letter. Very much like in my short story I wrote. So, really? and I actually did do that kind of stuff. And sometimes I'd get a response, sometimes I wouldn't. Again, because a little kid, asking questions that no one understands, probably, unless you're a little kid taking that in. But, that was another aspect of me trying to understand I guess, what Hollywood was, and seeing the programming, again, limited programming that I did see as a little kid, and comprehending it. It wasn't until my family moved to the country, and that whole thing started because of television. Believe it or not, my mother would watch I Love Lucy when Lucy says, "Hey, Ricky, wouldn't it be great to have little Ricky grow up out in the country," and blah, blah, blah. And my mother started using that psychology on my father. And so in fact, us moving to the country was because of I Love Lucy. And I'm not joking. I remember it because at that time, I Love Lucy, which was on in the early 50s, and when I would see it as a kid, it was already rerun. So I would watch these episodes. And again, black and white TV. So, it didn't make any difference to me. But that was the kind of the turning point as far as us moving from the big city of Pekin, Illinois, out to the country in Mapleton, Illinois, and growing up then. So I grew up more out in the country than I did ever in the city, because by that time when we moved out to the country, it was either a second or third grade. So the rest of my upbringing was out in the country on a farm. So now my parents are not farmers per se, although my father tried it and would have other people help him with it, because again, if you're going to try to till the land and everything, you got to have a lot of tractors and equipment. And again, my father was just scraping by, so I mean, he would borrow equipment or whatever he could do, but I mean, and he would buy some equipment when there was a sale at a local farm, when someone was either passed away or decided they were getting too old to do it, so he'd buy some of the equipment. So that's how my father came upon some of the equipment. But then
well, do you think, so when you were on the farm during that developing time, which was under the age of 12th grade,
right,
again, do you think did you have to, a lot of people, when they're more isolated, whether they're an only child or isolated in their environments, or have a simpler environment with less distractions and more nature, they tend to develop their imagination more. Do you think that those were things that you were doing at the time?
Oh yeah, I mean, I at that time, I'd be up in my room on the second floor, which would overlook those woods and everything. I would sit there with a tablet of paper and I'd be drawing a lot. And some of the things I would draw would be, mostly it was aimed towards humans, as opposed to doing still lifes and stuff like that. Even though I was surrounded by basically nature and stuff, I drew a lot of stuff that was really, again, figurative or facially or whatever. I did a lot of cartoons. During that time period, I would draw out, things like Charlie Brown, because I really liked Charlie Brown. And I ended up, believe it or not, I ended up sending many a letter to Charles Schultz, who actually wrote back to me. And I have some of his letters where he actually wrote to me, and he would draw something on the note that he would send to me. And so I have those from Charles Schultz himself. And so I thought maybe I might want to be a cartoonist, because I had such an interest in that. As a side note, because I did so much of that drawing with the Charlie Brown figures and stuff like that, my art teacher, Mr. Keating, so you remember his name, this was I think it was the fourth grade, asked me for some of my drawings, because I would use pen and ink and draw them out just like Charles Schultz would, of course, very crudely compared to Charles Schultz. And he collected a lot of my artwork. And one day he says to me, "Brad, here's my keys. I got some stuff out of my car. It's just right outside. Can you go get it for me?" So I go out there to get the stuff for him. And I open his car door, and what should be on the seat, but it was a local newspaper called the Glassford Gazette. And it was my drawings on the front page of the newspaper, and with a story about me. And I bring those in, and I mean, my face was like, I was surprised as heck about that, showing it to him. And he just had this look on his face like he knew he got me.
Mm-hmm.
And he took the drawings all the way over to the newspaper and said, hey, I have a kid who's really into this. Would you like to do a story about him? And so
Mm-hmm.
they did a little story, and he supplied all the information and printed it up, and it was on the cover of that local newspaper, which to this day, I mean, I was like, wow. So I was very lucky. As a kid growing up, I had some teachers who really took an interest in me as a student and tried to foster whatever they could as far as my abilities. Now, because I grew up in the country with these teachers who didn't have the big city kind of stuff that they had to deal with, I think they were probably able to take more time with some of us students who showed interests that we could be, pushed a little further than the normal student.
I also think it was a period where the educational system had more of these things accessible, even if you were in smaller environments. I just think the structure of school environments, the arts was still a part of this program. Music was still a part of the program, I think. And I think then if you did, thankfully, in your case, and I relate to this in my case, had happened to be aligned with the right people who recognized your gift, could again change the trajectory of how you thought, how you got recognized, how you were valued, appreciated, and honored, and how that could then plant those seeds for what was to come next. Not because there was a guarantee, but what would instill in you that fire of confidence,
right,
or sense of this is possible, whatever this is possible meant. It didn't have to have a clear vision. It just says, oh my God, this is something that really people think is special. And in that moment, when you realized this is being acknowledged for something that you loved, how do you remember how that made you feel besides the surprise of it?
I was surprised, but it also was, I mean, the fact that, and to this day, I mean, I can name off several teachers who were pivotal in helping me to get to that next little level. I mean, again, these are adults who see something in a child, and that not necessarily my parents would see, but because the teachers were a little more in tune to it, they saw stuff that could be fostered and pushed a little bit more, given a little bit more help, that it actually might develop into something more fulfilling as it may be a career. And I think teachers, they're underpaid, they're overworked, they are to this day. I mean, most of them are not given the I guess the amount of attention that they can help in helping a child. I mean, being a teacher today is extremely difficult, but back then it was simpler times and things were a little easier. I don't know how teachers do it today because there's just so many issues that are going on now that makes it very difficult.
Right.
And that's why I think so many
Well,
people don't want to be teachers anymore.
well, and to your point, and literally you took your feelings and my feelings and spoke on it. The value of a teacher in a child's life is so eminent,
Mhm.
and you can't possibly know who, again, like I said earlier, you're going to be aligned with, but the value that somebody can leave that lingering impression or change be, like you said, so pivotal and so impressionable, and take those qualities that maybe, like you said, your parents did or didn't recognize, or couldn't because of their elements or environment. And I'm not saying that was the case with your parents. I'm just saying we never know with each environment. Some of our environments people do recognize, and that doesn't mean that that's going to change your life and make you a success.
Sure.
Like there's so, there's just so many little finite moments and reasons why people become or don't become. But thankfully in this moment, And knowing what I know about you and your gift and your talents, thankfully people did recognize, acknowledge, and give the little Brad that opportunity to dream bigger. And do you think from that experience it catapulted you into dreaming bigger and thinking that this was a possibility? Well, because again, you were in fourth grade, so it wasn't even like you were towards the middle part of your high school education. Where from that, from fourth grade forward, did you start to formulate an opinion about what you wanted to do?
What happened is, again, at that point, we moved out to the country. I think one of the big turning points was the fact that on my sister's birthday, my father decided to purchase, and this was quite a big purchase for him, our first and only, basically at that time, for a very long time, a color TV.
Mm.
So this RCMA or RCA television arrives, and it arrives with the guy who's going to set it all up for us and everything. And it's in a wooden cabinet, just like a lot of those televisions were back in that time period. And it sets it up in the living room. Again, we're out in the country now, and turns it on. And for the first time, we're seeing color. And that was a huge change, I think, for me, as well as I'm sure my siblings. And seeing a program for the first time, being able to see Star Trek, which was a very formidable thing for me, in color, seeing Mr. Spock and his ears and all of that, and his yellowish tinged color, was amazing to see this. And then seeing shows like Lost in Space, which was very colorful. At that time, when color came into being, it was a very desirable thing to make everything as bright and as obnoxious as possible, to prove that that's the reason why you get a color TV. You want to see color. So, yeah. I mean, that's when, at that time, that was the beginning of Saturday morning cartoons. When I was at about that age, Saturday morning cartoons did not arrive until, I would say probably, there was cartoons. We had the Flintstones. It was prime time when I saw it in black and white. And there was also Johnny Quest, which was prime time, was not Saturday morning. Saturday morning wasn't there yet until we got from the 50s into, I would say, mid 60s. And that's when Saturday morning shows started. So, like I said, otherwise they were primetime entertainment. And which a lot of people don't know that actually happened, but it went from prime time. They were able, I guess the networks were able to figure out how to financially get this to work, so that they had them on in the mornings, on Saturday mornings, for a period of a couple of hours. I think it was like 3 or 4 hours, and you'd have cartoon after cartoon. But they would show things like Bugs Bunny, which was actually made during World War II in that time period. So we're looking at something that was made in the 40s, was shown in the theaters as a short, when you went to see a primetime show, and then didn't then develop and went from that into Saturday morning. So there was a whole progression even for animation.
Of course, and yeah, whether it was Bugs Bunny or Roadrunner, Felix the Cat, or any of those things that led into that culture. And did you watch anything like HR Puffenstuff? HR
Puffenstuff didn't happen. That show didn't happen until the 70s.
Right, it didn't.
So in the 60s, we were watching the beginnings of Hanna-Barbera cartoons, right, and Warner Brothers cartoons, and some others that were at that time. You also had, I'm trying to remember what it was called. It had two puppets, and it was, and they would show kids shows, and that was usually at the end of the Saturday morning time period, and it was two puppets and Fran. Kukla, Fran, and Ollie.
I was going to say, right.
I don't remember what the show itself was called, because now it's too many years past that I haven't thought about that. But they would show programming that was developed for kids all over the world. And there was programs on there that they would show that was just kind of, I remember the one about the red balloon that would follow this kid all over the place. And I mean, it was just such an enchanting little story that was made, I believe, in France. Just a beautiful story. And
Did you
so
watch Mr. Green Jeans, or were you a Sesame Street kid at all? Because it did start in the 60s.
Sesame Street didn't happen until we had PBS. So, and we didn't have PBS until well into the 70s. So yes, I would watch Captain Kangaroo. There was also Romper Room. There was also Bozo the Clown, which were
Right.
all things that were known to me at that time. Sesame Street didn't happen until we got a PBS channel in Peoria, which was channel 47, which is still there. And that's when the first time I saw Sesame Street. But I was already a little older than that. What fascinated me about Sesame Street was the puppetry. So I would watch it, just even though it was, kind of kid-like, I was just more amazed by the puppetry that was being done with the Muppets and how they were being done and how they were constructed and how they were operating. So again, me trying to be analytical, trying to figure out how that's done.
So it's interesting to listen to your observations and how they weren't parallel to mine because of just a few years difference. Because I became a latchkey kid the year Sesame Street came out. So that's what babysat me when I came home, because my mom had to go back to work.
Right.
As we were young kids. This was now in our new home. It was actually not, for us in Rockford, Illinois, was not PBS that I recall, because again, we only had the three major stations. And if I know it was a PBS, so I know it was a public, PBS show, but I don't remember, having access to that because there was no cable. So I don't remember. I remember feeling like it was just one of the major networks. I don't ever remember seeing Bozo until, even though I knew of Bozo, I don't really remember of it until actually when I got into my professional career, which sounds crazy. And I also remember just growing up in a very political, cultural household.
Right.
Where we were exposed to a lot of live theater, a lot of music, a lot of art, a lot of fashion because of my family's upbringing. And like you, because of being fortunate enough to have been aligned with certain teachers from the time I was also 9, 10 years of age, getting recognized for what I was doing in the arts. One of our art teacher at the time had pulled in a Harley Davidson motorcycle in the class for these 4th and 5th graders. And of course, most people were expecting that the result would be a stick figure motorcycle. And I, along with all my peers, went on to draw this motorcycle. And at the end of the class, my teacher saw my drawing and I think was gobsmacked, because it caused a reaction from their point. I had literally drawn this motorcycle in perfect perspective in every detail, which was the reveal of, though I had already been doing art classes since I was a little kid and my parents had recognized, and they were just like little Saturday, a weekend class, or like, I don't even remember it, or was going to summer camp and painting a totem pole. I mean, we're not talking like, Picasso here, but because of those teachers and because of the time of our education, was I fortunate enough to also be brought to the attention of principals and higher education. And by the time I entered 7th grade, was having my artwork that I was producing put into art shows and going up competitively for art awards, and started winning and being recognized on a national basis. And so the reason why I ask you these questions is, trigger points, pivot points, country, middle of the city. Again, I don't think it matters who you are. It's what your inner spirit says, now what? Now what's next? How do I formulate? How do I mold this clay consciously or unconsciously? So you get into high school, and then you're going to seek further on in your education. Did you, in going to college, were you going into fine arts, but were you pursuing fine arts? What was it? And were you having to put together a portfolio and doing all that?
Well,
Because I know I did.
Well, I mean, for me, I wasn't an art major.
Okay.
So, I mean, at the college level, I mean, stepping back from college first, let's say, I'm going to tell you, here's some of the steps that came in that played pivotal points to getting me where I was. One day I was sick, so my mother kept me home. I happened to see a viewing of the Today Show, and they were interviewing Leonard Nimoy and talking about his makeup for Star Trek. And he showed what his ears looked like and explained to the viewing audience that they were put on with spirit gum. And I mean, I'm listening to all this because now I'm homesick. I'm watching this, and Star Trek is very interesting to me. So I'm thinking, okay, spirit gum. So that's how you do this. You have to do spirit gum. You have to put this ear on, and blah blah blah. Okay, then now fast forward to it's Halloween. My brother Craig has what's referred to as a goop machine that was made by Mattel, and you as a kid would get these metal molds, and you would get this liquid plastic that you squeeze into the mold. You would bake it, and when you baked it, it would come out, and you would have a flexible material that you could do army soldiers with, or bugs, or whatever you wanted to do. Well, they happen to have in the goop machine a flesh colored goop. So I ended up taking that and fashioning out of aluminum foil and then baking in my mother's oven Mr. Spock ears. And somehow, I don't know how this even happened, we got a catalog that was a magic catalog, and in there was that elusive material called spirit gum. So I sent for the spirit gum, made my ears out of the plastic goop, which is basically was hot melt vinyl. And I didn't know at the time, but that's what it was. Did that. For the first time, I thought, okay, I got this spirit gum, that's this magical stuff that Leonard Nimoy talked about. And I put some on my ear, and I take the ear that I have, and I'm pushing it on the ear, and I release it, and it falls off. I'm like, crap. So I thought, okay, well, maybe I didn't push it hard enough. So I kept doing this back and forth, not knowing that I was actually tacking the spirit gum to eventually where the ears stayed. So now I'm a little kid, and I borrow my mother's eyebrow pencil, and I'm drawing my eyebrows up, have these ears on. I put on a blue sweater and fashion out of cardboard, the little insignia. And so I go out there with my brothers. We go back to Pekin, Illinois, because we're out in the country. There's no one going to be giving away candy out in the country. So we go into Pekin, Illinois, and I'm walking around, and I remember one time in one of the houses we went, these people came up, and this man goes, it was so fascinating. You could tell I was trying to be Mr. Spock, and he's pulling on my ears, trying to figure out how they're attached. And I'm like, hey, that hurts, because my ear was actually flexing and going with it, because now they've been on for a while, and it was really holding on. And so this was like, to me, was amazing. I was able to actually fool people thinking I had some, extensions of my ears. Okay, now fast forward, we go home, and I'm going to take the ears off. Now, there was no instructions on how to remove it. So as a little kid, I'm thinking to myself, oh, well, you just, you pull it off, which hurt, and then you use soap and water to get the glue off. I do that. My father's like, okay, it's late. You need to get to bed. The Tonight Show is coming on. It's 10:30. You need to get up for a school tomorrow. So I go upstairs. I get in my bed, and I'm on the upper bunk, and I roll over, and the pillow is pushed against my head. And then I decide to roll over again because it's not comfortable. And the pillow, which I didn't know was stuck to my ear, comes with me and comes right over my face. So I'm being smothered by my pillow stuck to my ear. So I'm like, what the hell? And I wake up and I'm trying to yank this pillow off my ears. And so I go downstairs in my pajamas. I'm in the bathroom, rubbing my ears raw with soap and water. And my father says, what is going on? Why are you up? You're supposed to be asleep. And I like, my pillow was stuck to my head. He's like, stuck to your head? What are you talking about? I go, I tried to take that stuff off and I couldn't do it. And the pillow was stuck to my head. And he's like, are you trying not to go to sleep? Get up to bed. And I mean, so now I go to school the next day, my ears are raw and red. And that was my first excursion into effects makeup as a little kid. So now fast forward this, it's 1976, and I'm not even in high school yet. And I decide I'm going to help with the bicentennial play that they're going to put on at our school. Now, this is at the high school level. So, but I'm not in high school. So I'm going to be in charge of the makeup. So I had to come up with a look-alike for Abraham Lincoln. I had to come up with a look-alike for George Washington, Ben Franklin, and Thomas Jefferson for the bicentennial play. Well, luckily for me, again, I go back trying to find information and I find where I can get a ball cap. And I pulled this ball cap on the person who would end up being my high school drama teacher, Mr. Gary McCann. And I even figured out how to attach hair to it. Again, I'm a little kid with no books, so I'm just figuring this out on my own. And then I figure, okay, well, there's this material called latex, because I remember, Leonard Nimoy talking about latex. So I got some latex and I was able to fashion a wart for the
Abraham Lincoln.
Abraham Lincoln, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, I knew now that if you put the spirit gum on there, you have to touch it many times. I didn't know what it was called at that point because, again, I had no makeup books around to show me any of this. So I was able to do that. And then I even got some fake fur and hand laid a goatee, just like, Abraham Lincoln. And then came up with, okay, so I was able to come up with some makeup from Gary McCann, who had some makeup because he's the high school teacher in drama,
Mm-hmm.
and gave me some what was called grease paint. And so I was able to figure out how to do the makeup with grease paint. And again, that was my next big excursion into makeup because of that. Then it wasn't until I was in high school that Gary McCann remembered me putting a ball cap on him and making him look like Ben Franklin. And he says, hey, why don't you take some classes in school and help out with the makeup department? So then I did that. And so one of the first shows I did as a quote makeup person, as well as an actor, was a stage production of David and Lisa. And so I was in the show and I had to age myself because I played David's father, and I also did the makeup for the show. And then the next thing that we had that they put on was a production of Guys and Dolls. Did the same thing. I was in the show as Liver Lips Louie and also was doing the makeup for the show. So it progressed that way because of high school. Now then fast forward to college, I'm now going to Illinois State University, which is in Bloomington Normal. And I ended up taking some natural makeup classes and had access to supplies and stuff. And I started doing makeup. And one of the first things I did for that was a production of The Passions of Dracula. And The Passions of Dracula, I had to create a nose for Dr. Sear? No, I forgot how you pronounce his name. He's the one in charge of the asylum. Anyway, so I make a fake nose for him out of latex that's hollow, and I figure, well, it can't be hollow because if he puts the glasses on, it's going to put a dent in it. So I end up stuffing it with cotton, gluing it on, blending it off, and everything. But the big problem was trying to figure out how to do the fangs. So at that point, I was getting orthodontic work on my teeth for my braces because I had terrible teeth. And so I went to my orthodontist and told him, and he says, okay, well, here's what we're going to do. I took a cast of the actor's teeth and he helped me to fashion them using, the various plastics that you use for orthodontic work and to make a partials and stuff like that. And so he was instrumental in showing me how to make dentures, basically. And he helped me to make the fangs. So again, having people around that saw that I had an interest, and then they almost by very definition, they kind of reverted back to kids as well, like my orthodontist, and he just was so giddy to help me to figure out how to do these teeth. And I think he enjoyed it because it took him out of his normal orthodontic work, and now he gets to do something that's creative.
Absolutely. So when you went into college, you said your degree wasn't in finance. What was your degree in at SIU?
It was in art. I had an art degree, which
it was fine arts. Oh,
yes,
that's what I thought.
Yeah, it was fine arts. And then what was interesting is when it came time for me to graduate, I spent so much time in the theater department as well as in the art department that the theater people say, well, no, you should stand with us, not with the art kids. And, the art kids are saying, no, you're part of us, so you should stand. So I was one of those people that kind of went between the two departments.
Mm-hmm. And
because to me, I felt that makeup work and working in theater was the same as working as an artist, because it's just your various degrees of separation as far as what you consider fine art and what's performance art. So I saw that as being a very real, tangible thing, that the two could coexist, because I think you need one to create the other. So,
Agreed.
and I it's funny how back then people just didn't understand why I would think that way. But it's like, what you have to have an art background to appreciate to be able to do the other. And I think as a makeup artist, having an art background gives you a different perspective. And then if someone comes in just solely as a makeup applicator, I mean, I think in terms of color, texture, I think of the character because of coming from theater as opposed to just coming from, doing makeup for film and television. I think of those elements because in theater, you have much more crossover of all the departments talking to each other, which you don't always get in film and television.
No, in theater, there's a much more co-collaborative, co-creation kind of community than, and like yourself, I do agree because I was a kid growing up in the fashion world that was an artist that went and got my fine arts degree, but was also pre-med. And then from that classical upbringing of illustrating, painting, sculpting, did photography and filmmaking and the specific studies of that, also while doing theater, also while now my pre-med had gone so far, but had to drop it economically, but bringing all those elements together into what we ended up becoming professionally absolutely supports, creates, is the trajectory of how I think as somebody, as an artist, how one thinks. I know, but I can't speak for you, but I know as a makeup artist, I don't think about how just the product. I think about color composition. I think about lighting. I think about exposure. I think about composition. I think about character development. I think about why something would be. It's a very analytical approach, but a very passionate, big picture approach that I remember when I first got in felt different than a lot of the peers I was standing side by side with after I had gotten to LA, because in Chicago it was a smaller community when I started professionally. But my point to it is, I agree with you. I think that it makes you a better artist. I think it makes you a thinking artist. I think it brings more value, more sensibility. But interestingly enough, as you said about film, I thought as a filmmaker, somebody who wanted to direct, because I didn't think I was going to become a makeup artist. I think we've talked about this, not on Zoom, but I, as a woman, wanted to direct. And one of the things that I knew that once I became a makeup and hair artist, not because I knew anybody, but feeling like if I do this, I can still be a part of the entertainment industry and tell story. I remember thinking that I thought I was getting into an industry that was where a bunch of intellects and a bunch of creative people were getting involved to tell story as collaborators, as co-creators. And though we do, there's not always the communication that I thought, like what I experienced on the theater stage or within the theater community. It was different. That's so I'm agreeing with you regarding what you just said, believing that was the point you were making. So in college, you get your fine arts degree. You've been very much an integral part of the theater community, and you're at your school at SIU. And then what happens?
Yeah, it was interesting. At that time, one of my teachers, Dan Wilhelm, who was a costume designer, says, "Hey, Brad, we got a flyer in the mail. You should go up and see it. It's on the big pegboard up in towards the theater classes up there. You might find something interesting up there." So I went up there, and there was a flyer that was looking for people who wanted to do makeup at the Utah Shakespeare Festival. And this was a paid position. So as opposed to freebie stuff, as most of us start off with doing theater, we're not getting paid anything. And they wanted someone who would know how to do some ventilating. Well, I did some ventilating. I learned how to ventilate by looking at the Richard Corson book, because in high school I had a performer who liked to have mustaches, and so I learned how to ventilate just by looking at the Richard Corson book and looking at the step-by-step photos or illustrations and practicing that. So I ended up contacting them. I got called to come in. And so I took the Greyhound bus with one of the other kids in the area who was going to go into the costume department. And we took, I think it was a 2-day journey to get to Utah from Illinois on the Greyhound bus. And that started me doing theatrical makeup, more professional level, getting paid. And at the Utah Shakespeare Festival, they hire 3 people to help make hair pieces and to figure out the makeups and stuff like that. And then, of course, you have the department head, which was Larry Pennington. And the first time I saw Larry Pennington, now he comes up, roaring up on a motorcycle, takes off a helmet. He has long hair, and he's a guy in his like 30s. And, here I am in my, late teens, early 20s. And he looks at me, I look at him, and he tells me later, he goes, "I thought, my God, I hired John Boy Walton because I had blonde hair and, from the farm and everything." And I look at him, I'm thinking I'm working for the Hells Angels. And so the two of us, along with the 2 other makeup people, it was very funny. The 2 of us, and then the other 2 makeup artists, there was Gracie Muschella, and the other girl was, I'm trying to remember, she was from Texas, and I'm drawing a blank on her name. So it was 2 guys and 2 girls, and we all got along great working on this.
What an amazing opportunity. Now, let me ask you something. So you see this flyer, you're told to go look at this flyer, you see this flyer. It's an opportunity of a lifetime, especially coming out of the university system, being a fine arts degree kid and trying to make a living with that.
Right.
In the early, you're talking about 1980, 81-ish, I'm assuming, 82 at the most.
Yeah, something like not
during the Reagan era of all crazy ass times, because you're coming out of a recession, you're going into this whole opulent mentality, the Iran war, the gas embargo, like there were lots of things going on socially and economically.
Sure.
And even though you went to a university that was a state school, so maybe you didn't have, I'm not assuming, by the way, maybe you did not have a lot of overhead that you owed back to school, if any. Maybe your parents were able to afford it. I, on the other hand, didn't make that smart decision.
Right.
I went to all private schools. I started with the University of Illinois with medical illustration, pre-med fine arts. But by the time I finished, post with Columbia and Beloit, getting my fine arts, but all the other
Right.
focuses, I was so in debt, so behind the eight ball. It was just like it was barely above water, which is why I ended up going to beauty school, to just try to rub two sticks together, as I always said. So you get this opportunity. So let me ask you this. What did you have to do? Was it because of who you knew or the connection, or that you got offered that position out of all over the country?
I never got a chance to ask Larry why he chose me. Of course, you have a phone interview, so they want to know something about your temperament and how you work, and he wanted to know what things I've worked on, and I explained to him some of the different things I had worked on at the university level, and also at that time I had also done some makeup for the Illinois Opera Association, so I did opera makeup too. And so because I knew somewhat how to ventilate and how to do applicational makeup and everything, I think that was one of the reasons why he chose me. Now, the other two people, Gracie was from Sacramento, California.
Mm-hmm.
And I think her name was Monica. I could be wrong. She was from Texas, and she worked in theater down in Texas. So there was a various degrees of insight into makeup and ventilating and that kind of stuff. So we all kind of complemented each other on that. So I think that helped a lot. That first month there, every day you worked basically 6 days a week for at least 8 to 10 hours, and you'd sit there and ventilate and get things ready for the productions. And then we'd also, during the time period of that, we'd also have what they would be like photo ops, to take pictures of some of the characters, assemble their makeup, do the hair pieces on them and everything, and put them in wardrobe, and then take photos for the program. So you had that as well. So there was a lot going on. And I mean, you were working a lot, and I worked around a lot of different actors at that time. It was a great experience. It's a very unusual experience, because again, a lot of times at that time in most people's lives, as you said, you have debt and everything else. Here's an actual opportunity to work for a very well-known theater, regional theater, and to get paid to do it on top of that. And they also give you free room and board.
I was going to ask, I mean, a huge blessing, a huge, like, perfect stars align opportunity, really ideal circumstances, considering who and what you were, what was leading up to this point. Like, I just think, wow, how fantastic and how validating to be able to do something at such a young age with your education, coming out of your education, and like just jumping right into the fire, but a fire that was giving you the close to the fire opportunities to work and develop your skill set, to create relationships, to work as a team, to bring value to the performers and the performances, to really realize, consciously or not, the value of having lots of different skills that applied to making what really made a truly professional in this industry, and the importance of that, even though that may or may not have been a conversation. But even like you said, all of you combined were like the strengths and weaknesses to one another, so you could raise each other up. And again, really like foundational elements to whether you're a makeup artist or just in life in general, the importance of those values and foundations, and what it takes to be in your personal life or your professional life, no matter who or what you do.
Well,
Would you agree?
Right. And then after that, after working there for an entire summer, I end up going back to Illinois. I did some work back there, just to get by, to pay for, bills and stuff like that. And then I ended up getting called to work a second season at the Utah Shakespeare Festival. So the second season, I go out there, work on that. I'm doing even more now because of the first season. And then at the end of that season, I end up getting a ride from someone to go to California, figuring I'll try to see what I can do in California. While I'm in California, before that, I had gotten a letter of drawings I had sent to the Filmation studio. Filmation did Saturday morning animation. And I sent a bunch of samples of my work. Well, they said, if you're out in California, Hal Sutherland, who is one of the big mucky mucks there, said, stop by and we'd like to test you. So I was in California. I was staying with a friend and I contacted them. They said, come on up. We're in Reseda, California. I was down in Costa Mesa. I rented a car, drove up there, didn't know at all how I was going to get there because I'd never been in California before. Ended up testing with them. I was tested as an in-betweener drawing He-Man. And I think it was Tila. So they gave me the extremes and they said, okay, we want you to do the, well, then when I was doing the flipping and everything, I noticed that one of the images was off. So I recalibrated the image. And
you were doing cell work. You were doing layered cell work.
This was on paper, doing your flipping.
Correct. With same elements, same sensibilities.
Right. So I noticed that it was jumping from one to the other. So I recalibrated the drawings to, I guess, incorporate that. And that was something that impressed them because I did something that probably most people, if they were testing, they didn't notice that. But I noticed it immediately because I'm flipping going, wait a minute, this is our calibration. So I was doing the in-betweens for that. So they said, okay, we want you to come back again. So I ended up going back a second time. And at that time, they were doing a feature that was about Pinocchio. So I was asked to do General McBumblebee. I think that's the character name. So I drew that up as an in-betweens and stuff like that. And then they said, okay, we want you to come back another time. So they wanted to test me in the color department because of my background in art. So I met with, her name was Flavia, I believe, and she was the head of the color and ink department. And so they tested me on that department. And after being there 3 separate times, they come up to me and they said, you know, you're not formally trained in animation, but because of your art background, we would like you to be considered for a program that we want to do, which is to basically apprentice under us. And we're going to have our own apprenticeship program to train you the way we want you to be trained. Again, because of my art background, they could see that I could draw different styles. So I was supposed to be fast-tracked into that program. Well, as things happen, Filmation Studios was bought out by GE. And once they got a hold of it, they dismantled the whole thing. So there went my opportunity. So then, I don't know, I don't remember how I did this, but I thought, well, you know what? I'm going to try calling Krylon up in San Francisco, see if I can get some work up there because of my work at the Utah Shakespeare Festival. I called there. I talked to Richard Berlich, who is the president of Krylon in the U.S. And he said, well, I would, because I told him my credentials and stuff. He said, I'd hire you on the spot, but you're down in Southern California. We're up in Northern California. So I said, okay, well, I'll change that for you. And I booked a ticket, flew up there, met with him, and I was hired on the spot to help develop products for them.
I cannot wait for you to hear the rest of our conversation that I sit down and have with Brad Look next week. So join us again next week for the continuation of this amazing man, Brad Look, who is an award-winning makeup artist, and his reflection on who and what to him makes a makeup artist become a valuable contribution to this town. It's a very special conversation. Thank you so much for joining this week. I look forward to you joining next week. In the meantime, much love. Bye for now.
You don't want to always have everything as success. Failures, how you work with a failure and turn a failure into an asset is probably better than having everything work out for you, because then you're going to think outside the box. You're going to say, how can I use this in a way? Many times, I'm sure people who are listening to this podcast, something happened in such a way that all of a sudden they came up with something better than what they would have done if it worked out right the first time. And life is failure, and how to use failure to your advantage.
Gift to interact with somebody like Brad Look, who is an award-winning artist in Hollywood, is a gift that keeps giving, because his insight, his education, his perspective, and his collaboration and his contribution to the makeup artistry world that we are so lucky to have is something that I'm so excited for you to hear all about as I sit down with Brad Look for part 2 of our conversation of what I'm excited to continue with. And so hold your seat, pull up a chair, join us around the campfire, grab that coffee and cannoli, because you're in for a continued beautiful conversation with my dear friend, Brad Look.
One of my teachers, Dan Wilhelm, who was a costume designer, says, "Hey, Brad, we got a flyer in the mail. You should go up and see it. It's on the big pegboard up in towards the theater classes up there. You might find something interesting up there." So I went up there, and there was a flyer that was looking for people who wanted to do makeup at the Utah Shakespeare Festival. And this was a paid position. So as opposed to freebie stuff, as most of us start off with doing theater, we're not getting paid anything. And they wanted someone who would know how to do some ventilating. Well, I did some ventilating. I learned how to ventilate by looking at the Richard Corson book, because in high school I had a performer who liked to have mustaches, and so I learned how to ventilate just by looking at the Richard Corson book and looking at the step-by-step photos or illustrations and practicing that. So I ended up contacting them. I got called to come in. And so I took the Greyhound bus with one of the other kids in the area who was going to go into the costume department. And we took, I think it was a 2-day journey to get to Utah from Illinois on the Greyhound bus. And that started me doing theatrical makeup, more professional level, getting paid. And at the Utah Shakespeare Festival, they hire 3 people to help make hair pieces and to figure out the makeups and stuff like that. And then, of course, you have the department head, which was Larry Pennington. And the first time I saw Larry Pennington, now he comes up, roaring up on a motorcycle, takes off a helmet. He has long hair, and he's a guy in his like 30s. And, here I am in my, late teens, early 20s. And he looks at me, I look at him, and he tells me later, he goes, "I thought, my God, I hired John Boy Walton, because I had blonde hair and, from the farm and everything." And I look at him, I'm thinking, I'm working for the Hells Angels. And so the 2 of us, along with the 2 other makeup people, it was very funny. The 2 of us, and then the other 2 makeup artists, there was Gracie Muschella, and the other girl was, I'm trying to remember, she was from Texas, and I'm drawing a blank on her name. So it was 2 guys and 2 girls, and we all got along great working on this.
What an amazing opportunity. Now, let me ask you something. So you see this flyer, you're told to go look at this flyer, you see this flyer. It's an opportunity of a lifetime, especially coming out of the university system, being a fine arts degree kid and trying to make a living with that.
Right.
In the early, you're talking about 1980, 81-ish, I'm assuming, 82 at the
Probably,
most.
yeah, something like not.
During the Reagan era of all crazy ass times, because you're coming out of a recession, you're going into this whole opulent mentality, the Iran war, the gas embargo, like there were lots of things going on socially and economically.
Sure.
And even though you went to a university that was a state school, so maybe you didn't have, maybe, I'm not assuming, by the way, maybe you did not have a lot of overhead that you owed back to school, if any. Maybe your parents were able to afford it. I, on the other hand, didn't make that smart decision.
Right.
I went to all private schools. I started with the University of Illinois with medical illustration, pre-med fine arts. But by the time I finished, post with Columbia and Beloit, getting my fine arts, but all the other focuses, I was so in debt, so behind the eight ball. It was just like it was barely above water, which is why I ended up going to beauty school, to just try to rub two sticks together, as I always said. So you get this opportunity. So let me ask you this. What did you have to do? Was it because of who you knew or the connection, or that you got offered that position out of all over the country?
I never got a chance to ask Larry why he chose me. Of course, you have a phone interview, so they want to know something about your temperament and how you work, and he wanted to know what things I've worked on, and I explained to him some of the different things I had worked on at the university level, and also at that time I had also done some makeup for the Illinois Opera Association, so I did opera makeup too. And so because I knew somewhat how to ventilate and how to do applicational makeup and everything, I think that was one of the reasons why he chose me. Now, the other two people, Gracie was from Sacramento, California, and I think her name was Monica. I could be wrong. She was from Texas, and she worked in theater down in Texas. So there was a various degrees of insight into makeup and ventilating and that kind of stuff. So we all kind of complimented each other on that. So I think that helped a lot. That first month there, every day you worked basically 6 days a week for at least 8 to 10 hours, and you'd sit there and ventilate and get things ready for the productions. And then we'd also, during the time period of that, we'd also have what they would be like photo ops, to take pictures of some of the characters, assemble their makeup, do the hair pieces on them and everything, and put them in wardrobe, and then take photos for the program. So you had that as well. So there was a lot going on. And I mean, you were working a lot, and I worked around a lot of different actors at that time. It was a great experience. It's a very unusual experience, because again, a lot of times at that time in most people's lives, as you said, you have debt and everything else. Here's an actual opportunity to work for a very well-known theater, regional theater, and to get paid to do it on top of that. And they also give you free room and board.
I was going to ask, I mean, a huge, huge blessing, a huge, like, perfect stars align opportunity, really ideal circumstances, considering who and what you were, what was leading up to this point. Like, I just think, wow, how fantastic and how validating to be able to do something at such a young age with your education, coming out of your education, and like just jumping right into the fire, but a fire that was giving you the close to the fire opportunities to work and develop your skill set, to create relationships, to work as a team, to bring value to the performers and the performances, to really realize, consciously or not, the value of having lots of different skills that applied to making what really made a truly professional in this industry, and the importance of that, even though that may or may not have been a conversation. But even like you said, all of you combined were like the strengths and weaknesses to one another so you could raise each other up. And again, really like foundational elements to whether you're a makeup artist or just in life in general, the importance of those values and foundations and what it takes to be in your personal life or your professional life, no matter who or what you do.
Well,
Would you agree?
Right. And then after that, after working there for an entire summer, I end up going back to Illinois. I did some work back there just to get by, to pay for, bills and stuff like that. And then I ended up getting called to work a second season at the Utah Shakespeare Festival. So the second season, I go out there, work on that. I'm doing even more now because of the first season. And then at the end of that season, I end up getting a ride from someone to go to California, figuring I'll try to see what I can do in California. While I'm in California, before that, I had gotten a letter of drawings I had sent to the Filmation studio. Filmation did Saturday morning animation. And I sent a bunch of samples of my work. Well, they said, if you're out in California, Hal Sutherland, who was one of the big mucky mucks there, said, stop by and we'd like to test you. So I was in California. I was staying with a friend and I contacted them. They said, come on up. We're in Reseda, California. I was down in Costa Mesa. I rented a car, drove up there, didn't know at all how I was going to get there because I'd never been in California before. Ended up testing with them. I was tested as an in-betweener drawing He-Man. And I think it was Tila. So they gave me the extremes and they said, okay, we want you to do the, well, then when I was doing the flipping and everything, I noticed that one of the images was off. So I recalibrated the image. And
you were doing cell work. You were doing
right. Well, this was on paper, doing your flipping.
Correct.
With
same elements, same sensibilities.
Right. So I noticed that it was jumping from one to the other. So I recalibrated the drawings to, I guess, incorporate that. And that was something that impressed them because I did something that probably most people, if they were testing, they didn't notice that. But I noticed it immediately because I'm flipping going, wait a minute, this is our calibration. So I was doing the in-betweens for that. So they said, okay, we want you to come back again. So I ended up going back a second time. And at that time they were doing a feature that was about Pinocchio. So I was asked to do General McBumblebee. I think that's the character name. So I drew that up as an in-betweens and stuff like that. And then they said, okay, we want you to come back another time. So they wanted to test me in the color department because of my background in art. So I met with, her name was Flavia, I believe, and she was the head of the color and ink department. And so they tested me on that department. And after being there 3 separate times, they come up to me and they said, you're not formally trained in animation, but because of your art background, we would like you to be considered for a program that we want to do, which is to basically apprentice under us. And we're going to have our own apprenticeship program to train you the way we want you to be trained. Again, because of my art background, they could see that I could draw different styles. So I was supposed to be fast-tracked into that program. Well, as things happen, Filmation Studios was bought out by GE. And once they got a hold of it, they dismantled the whole thing. So there went my opportunity. So then, I don't know, I don't remember how I did this, but I thought, well, you know what? I'm going to try calling Krylon up in San Francisco, see if I can get some work up there because of my work at the Utah Shakespeare Festival. I called there. I talked to Richard Berlich, who was the president of Krylon in the U.S. And he said, I would, because I told him my credentials and stuff. He said, I'd hire you on the spot, but you're down in Southern California. We're up in Northern California. So I said, okay, well, I'll change that for you. And I booked a ticket, flew up there, met with him, and I was hired on the spot to help develop products for them. So then I was up at Krylon. So I go home at Christmas to see my parents, and I'm going through a bunch of junk mail my father collected for me. And one of the things was a catalog for a school in Cincinnati, Ohio. And I'm thinking, okay, great. Prior to this, I'm gonna have to backtrack. I was accepted to a program here in California for it was Cal Arts, not Cal Arts, California in Long Beach, Cal State of Long Beach.
Yeah.
They had a makeup program down there. So I had gotten all the way to being accepted into the program. I had gone through all the phone calls and all of that. I've been accepted by the whole committee. And then when I found out this, I was talking to Ralph Duckwall, who was the chairman there, that the program itself was a major in costuming and a minor in makeup. And I said, I'm not a costumer, I'm a makeup artist. And so I opted not to go to the school. So I turned it down after I had already been accepted. So now fast forward to this catalog I get from CCM. I'm ready to throw it out. I throw it off to the side to the garbage. And the whole thing pops open and folds out. And I bend down to pick it up to throw it in the garbage. And it has an MFA program for makeup artists. I'm like, really? So I look at this and I'm thinking, that's a bunch of BS probably, just like it was at Long Beach. So I end up getting on the phone and I called the phone number, and this was, right before Christmas. And this man answers the phone and I'm talking to him and I'm asking him about this program. And he's like, what do you want to know about? I go, okay, come on. Is this a real MFA program in makeup, not costuming? Or is it, is it a costume program? He goes, no. Why would you be getting an MFA degree in costuming if you're a makeup artist? I said, well, I thought the same thing. And then I got this whole bait and switch with North Carolina, the school in Long Beach. And he's like, no. He says, ours is an actual MFA program. That's a Master's of Fine Art degree. Our teacher is Lena Kaleva. She is a film makeup artist from Russia. She would be your teacher. He says, well, okay, what are your credentials? I said, I've worked at the Utah Shakespeare Festival, the Illinois Shakespeare Festival. At that time, I had already done some makeup for a film. And I just told him all the different things I did. He goes, oh, and I worked for the Krylon Makeup Corporation. It's like, really? What do you do at Krylon? I said, I develop makeup products. He goes, oh, you do? I said, yeah. I said, and I don't know why I said this. I said, okay, so what would it be worth to you for me to come to your school with my credentials? And he says, well, Brad, if your credentials are exactly what you say they are, he says, we'll have to go through all of this and determine this. He says, but if your credentials are exactly what you say they are, and you have all this background, he says, we will pay you a full free ride to come to our school. He says, that's what we want. He says, now you will be the only person in the MFA program. There will be undergrads, but we only take one person every 2 years for the MFA program. I said, really? He goes, yeah, really. I go, okay. I said, well, who am I talking to anyway? It turned out to be the department chair of that whole division. So he's like, okay, so here's what we're going to do. I'm going to be coming out there, and I'll give you a call when it's time for me to come out, and I want to physically meet with you because I have to come out to San Francisco anyway to look at some potential candidates for the opera department. So he says, we'll continue with this discussion then. So I end up getting a call. He says, where should I meet you? I said, why don't you come to Krylon? So he shows up at Krylon. I introduce him to my boss. I take him around Krylon just to show him all the things that we're doing at Krylon and developing. And then he takes me out to lunch and he says, Brad, he says, I'm going to tell you right now, as God's truth, he says, we want you very, very bad. He says, Lena Kaleva looked over your credentials and she wants you because you have such a strong art background. He goes, she wants people who are artists. And he says, she goes, that's the important thing, not the makeup, but the artistry. And so he says, are you willing to come to our school? I said, sure. So I get to CCM and I'm the only guy there, and the other people that are there, one of which is Paulie Luke from our union. and Zoe Hay also.
Wow.
So they were both undergrads at the time I was in the graduate program. And I met some other people, but those are the two that actually ended up coming out here and joining and getting into our union. So, right. I mean, it was interesting. And at that time I asked Lena, I said, so why did you take me? She says, because your art background. She says, your art background to me is much more worthy than the fact that you do the makeup. She goes, I know I can teach you anything about makeup. She says, but I can't teach you art. If you don't have that initial art sensibility, she goes, that can't be taught. You either have it or you don't. And she says, I could see from your samples and stuff, you definitely have this artist's eye. She goes, and that's what I wanted. And so that's how I ended up getting at CCM.
Well, that is such at this moment I want to stop, because that is such a true statement. And I don't know about you, but being around the industry as long as both of you and I have been, which is both of us over 30 years, I don't know what your experience was when people would find out your education and what level of education maybe they rewarded you for that. In Chicago, it was not an issue. When I moved to LA, though, speaking of having a fine arts degree, not that you're touting it, but just it's a matter of fact, was not something that resonated with a lot of peers, it felt.
No, not at all.
And I never understood it. And I was just like, wow, what's wrong with this guy? Well, why am I being made to feel bad for seeking something of higher education in something that I have a gift and talent and value in, like yourself? And why is that a negative when you're in this realm of creation and business? Why all of a sudden am I the odd man out, or what felt like?
Well, I mean, the other thing is kind of strange is I also learned very quickly, because I had a lot of theater makeup photos and stuff like that. And that was very frowned upon, because it's like it's theater, it's not, it's not film. And having been around Lena Kaleva, and her background was as a film makeup artist at Moss Films. Her thing was, when we did makeups for the theater, we did it for the front row. Her idea was it has to be of film quality. She goes, she didn't think of it as a substandard makeup because it's theater makeup. She wanted it as clean and as beautiful up close as it would be in the front row, second row, etc. She didn't think about it as for the back row. You have to do it so broad for that. So her background and what she approached it at was as a film makeup artist. And the same thing for the lace and ventilating, everything had to be very finite.
Right. And that was I think a really important facet of your learning curve, because I didn't go for an MFA because it's like I said, at that point, I mean, I would have been still in med school or something, with getting, but affordability, it was more like you got to get out there and start paying back your loans.
Sure.
Which is why I did the beauty school. But doing the beauty school is what led me into creating my own photography studio and doing fashion and commercials and then independent film. That was my version of my MFA, while also having worked with the Clinique Corporation and traveling around for them and teaching and selling. But my point to it, and a very interesting parallel, is what I know that I learned from in the fashion world and the print world was everything was being in the front row. Could you blow this up? Could you look under a loop? Could you see the detail? Could you see the transitions? Could you do the perfect lip that could be on a side of a building and represent a campaign? And one of the things that really stuck out to me, Brad, coming again to LA, was, I don't want to say it, that sounds, it's a very honest statement. It's not meant to be a negative statement about our peers or training, but the eye for perfection that did not feel, look, we've got extraordinary artists, so don't get me wrong, there's a lot of magnificent artists in our peer group, But in the moment, in that transition, within those first 5 to 10 years that I was observing things, everybody thought they were makeup artists, but they didn't have the training and the eye and the perfection that I was held accountable to through agency world to even be considered to submit my portfolio to a client in that moment to
Right.
compete for a job. And I remember thinking, wow, how do these people get here if this isn't like, if a sloppy lip or execution of a period work was not even considered? Like, that was something that I didn't understand.
Well, and again, in theater, I mean, you do a broad range of makeups, depending on the period of what the script is and the subject matter and stuff like that. And I mean, it was, it's interesting when I was working at the Utah Shakespeare, or excuse me, Krylon in San Francisco. We got a call. They were looking for a makeup artist to work at the Lorraine Hansberry Theater. Now, I show up there. I answer this call, and they look at me. Now, the Lorraine Hansberry Theater is an all-black theater. Now, I go in there looking lily white like I am, and they look at me, and they're like, "What are you doing here?" I go, "I'm a makeup artist." They're going, the first thing out of their mouth, and they said this to me, to my face, "What would a white boy like you know about doing black makeup?" I said, "Skin is skin." And they're like, "Really?" So no one was going to let me do their makeup. And there was a woman sitting there, and she raised her hand. She says, "Come on over here, white boy, and see what you can do with my makeup." So I sat down there and I started proceeding to do her makeup. She looked in the mirror. She looked and she goes, "You do know how to do makeup." She goes, "Even for a black person." She goes, "So many white people can't do black people at all." She goes, "They always look sickly or ashy or whatever." She goes, "You can do my makeup anytime." And at that point, I'm now have a free hand. Everyone goes, "Okay, he can do makeup." So I ended up doing everyone for this production. I don't even remember what the name of the production was because it's been so many years ago. But then I got another call to go back to the Lorraine Hansberry Theater, and they were going to do a show about a character who gets fragged, I believe is the term. And that is when they take a grenade and throw it in and kill someone. So I had to do not only the straight makeups for the show, I had to do a makeup to make this guy look fragged. And had to come up with something that could be applied quickly and easily to make him look fragged and basically blown up. And so that was combining straight makeup, period makeup, and then also effects makeup for an all black theater. And again, being a lily white guy like me, again, I approach it as an artist. It's like color is color. In mixing color, all you have to do is, if you know how to mix colors, if you need to adjust it, you adjust the color to represent the undertone that you're trying to do.
Yeah.
And it's like, it seems like a very simple thing to say, because again, coming from an art background, to me, that's what's the problem. However, I do see people laboring and trying to match a color. I remember I was doing a makeup not too long ago, and I was talking to the young lady who sat down on my desk or my chair. And as I'm talking to her, I'm just grabbing color, and I'm just have a wax palette, and I'm just starting to mix there. And we're talking, and I grab a brush and I start putting the base on right on her forehead. She's looking in the mirror and she goes, "Holy crap, how'd you do that?" She goes, "You're just looking at me and you're just mixing it." She goes, "It's like you're just on automatic pilot." I go, "It's because of my art background." I said, she's like, "I could never have done that." She goes, "I can't even tell where you put it." She goes, "It matches me so completely." And I started putting it all over, and she's like, "Damn." She goes, "What colors did you mix to do this?" She goes, "I want to know because I'd love to do my makeup like this too." And again, it's coming from an art background, having an understanding of colors and mixing colors, and being an artist, you're always mixing colors to get to what you want. You're not going to have 58 different tubes of color. You're going to have to mix the colors to get what you want. I mean, I've seen some makeup artists, they come loaded down with so many different bases and stuff, and they still can't even figure out how to match a person's color. My thing is, have the most minimal amount of colors with some auxiliary colors so you can go in there and alter it as you need to. And if you have that, you can basically get anyone's complexion color. But it's knowing how to do that.
But this does go back to a fine arts background and having an eye for color and understanding primary and secondary and tertiary wheels,
Right.
and being able to understand that no one human being has, we all have several values of undertones and highlights, like all the things that need to be created to tell the picture on the skin canvas. When you made the statement about skin is skin, again, the whole beauty of why I created this podcast, by the way, was after years and years and years of people telling me I should write a book, and my love for people and my love for conversation was to share my stories with other people's stories, and why, in our case, with you and I, the parallels of your story as well as my story. It's not a competition. It's a validation of both of our experiences. When I was finishing up beauty school and going and working for the Clinique Corporation, the only products in the commercial department stores for anybody of color was Fashion Fair. Right. And I remember looking at that line and going, wow, man, and already, because of my fine arts degrees and stuff, already my mind was just exploding, going into developing my own lines, and people were approaching me, but I didn't want it to be a private label. And this was in the late 80s. I remember specifically my agents and investors approaching me, and my specific statement was, unless I can work with my own chemist and create my own line, I do not want to just drop a product in a package and have a private label package. Sure. And this is before product lines exploded. This was before Stila and Bobbi Brown showed up, and then Estee Lauder pulled them, bought them out. This was before all of that. But I remember thinking it was hair and skin was just hair and skin, and it didn't matter whose body it was on, which is why when by the time I got to beauty school, I had such a large Black clientele, because I never thought twice about texture. What I knew was what I wanted to take away and what I wanted to bring to the table. I wanted to take away all the heavy chemicals that were being put on the head and make their hair move and do a blowout and do a great cut like a fine art sculpture. And I knew with skin that how to bring those undertones and how to bring that values, which is why I ended up heading up a lot of projects that in my initial career in film was predominantly Black talent, and heading up both hair and makeup, which is not a toot my horn situation. It was just a matter of how it was, which is why I ended up being the only white person on the Black hair Olympic team. Again, not tooting my horn. It was because I was interested. I wanted to learn. I wanted to carry forth the torch. I didn't think that this was out of alignment with, like, well, why is this so weird that you're a lily white boy or I'm a white woman participating in solving problems that happen to be makeup and hair oriented? Why is that a big deal? It's because we're fine artists. You don't think twice about it. And I think that as artists, as well as business people, as well as problem solvers, as well as having both been teachers, you and I both know that there should not be, this is not the realm of where you start separating people other than, can you deliver?
Sure. I mean, I recently, a couple of years ago, when I was working with a group of makeup artists, we were doing, what was it called? It was the one about the Hollywood stuntman. I'm drawing a blank on the name of that film.
The Quentin Tarantino,
right? Yes,
with Brad Pitt and Leo.
Right.
Yeah.
We had one night where we were supposed to do makeups, and it was going to be shot at the Playboy Mansion.
Mm-hmm.
And so I ended up doing two of the Playboy bunnies, and then I had
Mm-hmm.
a black actress who came up and sat in my chair, and she's kind of looking me over.
Mm-hmm.
And, I'm used to, you're a lily white guy, not even a woman, you're a guy. What do you know
Mm-hmm.
about doing that? And so I'm
Mm-hmm.
looking at her and I'm mixing up the color, and she looks at me. She goes, "That's the wrong color for my face." I said, "It's not going on your face." She goes, "What do you mean?" I go, "It's going on your eyelids." Her eyes kind of stood out, so I wanted to see
Mm-hmm.
them. So,
Mm-hmm.
and then I started doing the rest of her makeup, and she was questioning me on everything I did. Why are
Mm-hmm.
you doing this? Why are you doing that? I was putting some things on wet, some things on dry. I was layering things,
Mm-hmm.
so on and so forth. And what was so funny is she just questioned me on everything.
Mm-hmm.
Then she comes back and tells me the next day, because I have someone in my chair, and she goes, "I got so many compliments about your makeup that you did on me."
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, "Okay." She goes, "So when are you gonna get to do my makeup?" I said, "I have two of the Playboy bunnies first. I have to do. I can't get to you." She's like, "All right, I'll go to someone else." And so she goes to someone else, and that makeup artist comes over and says, "So what'd you use on her?" I said, "Well, I did this, this, and this." And he goes away and he's doing her makeup, and it's an earshot distance because I'm working on the two girls. And she's like, "No, no, 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 that's not, you're not doing that right. You're not doing that right. No, it should be like this. That's the way Brad did it." And it's like, she was so exasperated. She finally said, "Take it all off. Take it all off. I'm going to wait for Brad." Again, I could hear all this because it's just earshot distance. I could see him off to the corner from where I am in the tent. And that was the same thing. I mean, the one of the Playboy bunnies says to me, she goes, "I got so many compliments on that makeup." She goes, "Because I mean, I did things that a lot of people, don't do because they're more of a period thing to create some of this
Yeah.
effect." And she goes, "I walked out there, and Heba, who was the head of the
Yeah.
department, she goes, "Who did your makeup?" And she goes, "Well, Brad did." She goes, "Okay, wait right here." And she went over and got the director and brought the director over to her and says, "You have to feature her. This makeup that he did on her is so beautiful. It's so correct for the time period. You have to make sure she gets featured." And so the next day she comes up to me and she goes, "I got featured because of your makeup." And I go,
Yeah.
"Okay." And so I go, "Well, sit down. I'll do your makeup again." And then fast forward to this black actress who has to have the makeup done by someone else because she doesn't want to wait for me. Comes back over and she sits down. She goes, "Well, I can't believe how people can't do black makeup." She goes, "So, go ahead, do it." And so I ended up doing exactly the same thing I did the day before.
Yeah.
And it's like, again, it's this perception that if you are of a certain type, you can't do someone who's a little different from you. Again,
No, this is, go ahead. Go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
and that seems to be sometimes an issue.
Yeah, unfortunately, I think in today's day, it's become a greater issue. I certainly, I will never forget heading up one of the first movies I was heading up out here in LA. And I was heading up the hair department because it was pre-union. And and originally I was going to do both, and then realized that we needed to just keep me as the head of the hair department. And I'll never forget somebody who will remain nameless, Academy Award winning multiple times, walking into our trailer, who was not on our show, but visiting the director and the lead at the time, and them walking into the trailer that was a predominantly Black talent sitting in the chairs and Black talent behind the chairs, and then me. And this person basically yelling out throughout the trailer as if you're like in the middle of the kitchen, somebody's house in the kitchen, "What's the white girl doing here?"
Yeah.
As I'm performing and people are happily sitting in my chair because they see what I can do and what I am doing. And I'll never forget the statement. I never addressed the statement because I thought it's not worth addressing. And I thought it was more important to be of grace than to be of embarrassment, as I felt he was to himself, and spoke very loudly about who he was and how he saw things. It really actually shifted my mindset about this person and my level of respect to this person, who in fact could have been setting a tone and being a leader in this environment, even though not associated with the project. But it always, to this day, no matter where I see him at the Academy Awards or whatever, or in a project, I think of him in that assimilation. I think that that's your mindset. That's not my mindset. And I definitely think it's an important thing that we need to, as a society, as well as an integral part of this industry, need to be pushing through. I understand how certain communities have been limited in their involvement, but that has nothing to do with the ability of artistry and the ability of who and how, unfortunately, you and I both know that there's a lot of politics that are involved, or the
Sure.
who you know versus the what you know,
Sure.
or who's suited best for this particular situation. And yeah, of course, there's a lot of amazing people who have risen up over the years for all different reasons. But I definitely think that I wish there was a better way of exposing each other to one another for the sake of complementing projects, complementing developing community, and embracing and raising each other up collectively versus in a clique-like form, or in a limited belief form, or in a way that is A, good business, B, really showing true artistry across the board, not just in little pockets of, who's my BFF today.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. I mean, and again, I mean, when you're looking at this environment, it's a cultural environment.
Mm-hmm.
It's who you know, as you said, and there's all these aspects to it that play into decisions, when decisions are needing to be made of who you cast and who you bring in, and who you have as far as your support team. And again, part of it is it's a very political charged environment most of the time, which is why a lot of times I enjoy not even being in the trailer, just being in the tent, just being with everyone else, doing the background, because I don't have to be a part of all that political environment, which is so toxic at times. And I just don't have time for that. It's like, I just want to do my work and go home. I'm being paid the same as most people there. So it's like, I don't need to be putting up with all of the political aspects of trying just to work.
Well, and to that point, Brad, when you got into your career, once, the Film Nation stuff didn't pan out and you went to Krylon, and then you got your master's in Cincinnati and you came out of there, what was the trajectory of, once you finished your MFA, to coming out to Hollywood? Was that through connections through this university program, or was that by your own doing?
It was through myself. What I ended up doing at that point is I contacted, because I had met Maurice Stein very long ago when he was at the old location prior to the location that everyone knows Cinema Secrets to be at, which is now gone, unfortunately. But Maurice had I was doing a film that summer. It was a non-union film. And I happened to be into Cinema Secrets to get some supplies. And someone who was, I guess, shopping for their film or their TV show, they had some questions on some makeups. And I was just listening to Maurice. And I think I butted in and I said, no, that's incorrect. What they want is this, this, and this. And he's like, well, how do you know? I said, because I work for Krylon and I've worked with a lot of these different production companies. So, I mean, I knew Ben Nye real well. I knew Bob Kelly. I knew that. And so I remember he said, really? All this, you have all this background? I said, yeah, because I worked with all these different products. I know what they do and what they have in their line and how to use them. And so after CCM and finishing up with the Utah Shakespeare Festival, I ended up calling there and talking to Danny Stein. And Danny Stein kept kind of dragging his feet, because he's like, yeah, we'd like to have you come out and be a part of our sales team here. And so I figured I needed to have a job so I could go into other aspects and try to get work as a makeup artist. But I figured I needed, number one, a job to anchor me. So ultimately, Maurice got involved and said to Danny, have him come out, have him fly out and have him come in, because he goes, stop dragging your feet on this, basically is what he was saying to his son. Yeah, I want him to be here because he could be a real asset to our business. So finally flew out. I sent him a wig that I had ventilated and some samples of work. And no longer, I was only there for primarily a week when someone comes in and has a conference with Maurice, and I get called to Maurice's office. And I get asked to come into his office, and Scott Redwine, who was a makeup artist who was department heading a show called Guts and Glory, The Rise and Fall of Oliver North for CBS. It was a mini series. I get introduced to him, and Maurice says, he says, against my better judgment, Brad, you've only been here a week. However, Scott needs you to help out with a prosthetic makeup on this show. I'm going to let you have a leave of absence. And when you're not working, please come back and work for us here. And so I got hired to work on that particular miniseries, only being there a week. Now, this is very unusual, of course. And I was asked to do the Ronald Reagan makeup that was developed by Mike McCracken Sr. And so I end up doing the makeup. The first day, it was kind of disastrous because I was using all the same colors that Mike McCracken Sr. told me I should use, that he used for a video tape sequence that they were doing for the show. And to me, the colors didn't look right. Nothing looked right. And so I was kind of like, that's a disaster. So I thought, well, you know what? I need to go by my own guts on how I feel this needs to be colored. And so that's the second time I did the makeup. I just went by what I thought it needed to be done. And it looked to me, to my eye, much more believable because he'd done it for video, and video is a whole different kind of ball game as opposed to film, which the rest of the thing was being shot on.
Yeah.
So I redesigned the whole makeup, and it was the makeup was done on an actor by the name of Brian Clark, who did his best impersonation of Ronald Reagan, because Ronald Reagan was in office at this time. And so I tried to bring to bear the same look that Ronald Reagan had as far as facially with coloring and all of that. And it was a wraparound that went up here, and then you had a nose piece that went on, and then the rest was all blended into all match. So, and I felt very good about it. One day, however, Brian decides he has to blow his nose and asked me for a tissue. And I didn't really think about it because I'm thinking, I'm forgetting, he has a nose on. And he goes to blow the nose, and he does one of these. And what it does is it allows back pressure into the nose, the whole nose inflated. Now I have my eyes come out like a Terry Toon kind of cartoon look, go back in, and I'm like, holy crap, his nose just inflated like a balloon. So I go over there, and the whole thing went right back down and went right in position where it was before. And I'm like, okay, so now, Brian, anytime you blow your nose, just cover one nostril. Don't do both nostrils at the same time. So that was one thing that happened that was very interesting. The other thing that was very interesting was we had a very long setup, and some of our makeup people were off doing their thing. And I ended up sitting over there around some of the actors. And next thing I know, Peter Boyle comes over, and Bernard Hughes is there, and Brian's there, and all these other actors. And I'm sitting there and I'm talking to them, and I feel like I'm a host of a reality show because they all are talking to me, because I'm asking them questions about acting and what they bring to the character they're trying to portray. And what was interesting is all these actors are talking to me as if I'm like a peer, not just a makeup artist, because I'm asking questions that all of a sudden spur someone else going, hey, yeah, what about this? I did this on this show, and another. And it was a round table of all these actors with their chairs, and they're all kind of scooting close to me because they're asking me, I'm asking questions and I'm interested in them.
Yeah.
And that was something that was a really bizarre. It was bizarre experience because I've never seen anything like that happen with all these older actors just listening to me, and I'm asking them questions and they're like, hey, these are really interesting questions. And they responded to me.
Yeah.
It was, like I said, a very unusual experience.
Well, and a very unusual experience then and now, and what is and what isn't, and who you can and who you can't, and never knowing when that's going to backfire in your face, or if that's just going to be for the sake of, these are just a bunch of artists who are just sitting down and
right.
We're all common and we have a commonality and we're just interested, which one would think would be, but doesn't always play out that way, whether you are doing one person's beautiful effects makeup, or your department heading, or your personal, like, we both know that every scenario, it's like every dinner party has a different outcome.
Sure.
And people need to, people don't realize, some people think, I'm going to go in and be the best friends of it. Well, not everybody wants to be your best friend, or
right.
They act it and turn around and be like, who are you? And have I ever seen you before? And you're like, but I just was, kibitzing with you last week and you wanted to know my dog's name and I wanted to know you. Like, it's just, people don't realize that at the end of the day, we're providing customer service. We are of service. We are bringing a service to the table that is a necessary service. Well, we say necessary loosely, but a service that helps production, helps talent become their character, helps a DP create their lighting, helps tell the story from the written page. All these things collectively, we're helping get past and over the finish line. And hopefully people see it that way. We both also know that there's been a lot of, unfortunately, devaluing. It's like, it's like debunking a very important aspect of, like, what keeps us safe or whatever. Well, as makeup artists, it's part of what contributes to telling the big picture story, whether people, again, give value to that or not. It's changed a lot over the years, good, bad, or otherwise. With everything that evolved from that point forward, you obviously got aligned with a lot of great projects. You got nominated and won awards, from Emmys to Makeup and Hair Guild Awards. You've been sought after as a teacher in this business. You taught a lot of people. You made a lot of impressions on a lot of people's lives. And you are at a place in your career that you're closer to the potential of retiring in this aspect of your career versus the beginning of your career. And how do you see the evolution of, like, where you are today versus, going through this 30 plus year career at this juncture? How you see your participation? Where do you see yourself heading? I know that you're creating other things, but how do you see collectively what you've created, what you've achieved, and where you're at today versus where you want to see yourself for the next 30 years as a contributor, either to the arts or in life in general?
Well, I mean, that's an interesting question. I mean, it was a question that was asked when I was being interviewed by Joe Blasco. Joe Blasco had a little TV program where he would interview various makeup artists. And I remember when I went in there to talk with him, it was only supposed to be an hour. And after an hour, Joe says, can you be back? Can you stay? Because you're bringing up so many interesting things, comments about old Hollywood and techniques and stuff like that. He goes, that most people never ask me. He goes, and it's causing me to think of a lot of other things. So I ended up being there for 2 hours while we were just talking, just kind of like what we're doing right now. And that was one of the final questions he asked me. He says, where do you see yourself in the future? And I paused and he goes, wow, I actually stumped you. I said, no, you didn't stump me. Is the fact that I don't know. Unfortunately, I don't know where I am in this position because Hollywood is changing so much. If there's a place for me,
Mm-hmm.
I said, I don't really have a solid answer for you because everything seems to be so in flux right now with the future. The future is not like when I was a kid where you could see the future and you can see where the end is. Now that seems to be very almost foggy because
Mm-hmm.
I don't think any of us know where the end is anymore because there is so many developing things going on, not only in our entertainment, but in the world at large. I mean, who would have known about COVID and how
Mm-hmm.
COVID would do such a job on the world itself? I mean, and
Mm-hmm.
then you have so much unrest that's going on and so many other things that are taking place. That's hard to answer a question about the future when the future seems to be so elusive.
Mm-hmm.
And because of that, I mean, it's a hard one to answer. Now, in part to answer your question, I I have always enjoyed writing. To me, writing is just another aspect of being an artist.
Mm-hmm.
I would write articles. I have written articles that have been published. I co-wrote a book called Star Trek Aliens and Artifacts. And that came about because I wanted to do an article on the making of the Borgs for Star Trek First Contact. So I wrote this extensive article. I got permission from Rick Berman's office through Michael Westmore, my boss. Wrote this extensive article. It was 16 pages long. This was for a magazine. And explained the whole process and everything and the history behind it, the history behind the character, all of that, so that when you got done reading it, you had not only just the knowledge of the makeup and all that, but you got to feel the story, the writing of it. And so, again, that all encompasses how we, as a makeup artist or as an artist, envision this, working off other people's vision.
Yeah.
So I ended up showing that to one of the guys I would see on set. I didn't know it, but he also worked as a writer doing stuff for Simon and Schuster, which is owned by Paramount. So he took that article and took it and sent it to a woman at Simon and Schuster in New York. And Martha, I think it's Martha Clark is her name. And she was the head of Simon and Schuster Star Trek division for this. And so they liked the article so much that they said, can you take this idea and write a whole book using the same approach and do it all about the Star Trek makeups and giving the same kind of approach you took with the back history and the stories and all these little side things that you came up with. And so that's how I got approached to do Star Trek Aliens and Artifacts. So I wrote that, did a lot of research, took me a year to work on, interviewed everyone from John Chambers to Hua Chang to all these various people, not only about the television shows, but also about the movies. So the book itself was supposed to encompass the television series as well as the features. And they decided that they wanted to do just the first volume, just about the TV shows only. And it goes up to Voyager because Enterprise had not happened yet. So we came up with that. And I have a binder like this thick of notes and photographs to do the second part, but we never got a chance to do the second part, which would have been all the features and have all my notes and all the pertinent information for that. So that's how that kind of took place. Then from there, I got asked regularly to come up with articles for some of the Star Trek magazines. Then that went to coming up with articles for other magazines that I would come up with for various topics and stuff. And I remember one of the articles I wrote that was in the Star Trek magazine was about the connection of Star Trek to that of the Outer Limits connection. And I brought up many examples of those connections. And I ended up getting a call from Bob Justman, or Robert Justman, who was one of the producers of the original Star Trek. And he even decided to write an article from that point of view because he goes, and he gave me credit in his article saying, because of Brad Look's smart interpretation of this information and how he found all these connections, he goes, I decided I would, as the producer of the show of Outer Limits, I would try to expand upon what Brad did. So one artist expanded on another artist's work. So, I mean, again, you never know how things are going to feed in on themselves. So then to answer your question, I've been doing some writing and coming up with ideas for scripts. So one of which is a short animated script that you have a copy of, which is called A Package of Dreams. And A Package of Dreams encompasses things about my father and me being a makeup artist as opposed to what my character is wanting to be, which is a television horror host, but using that as an analogy to what I was trying to go through and how, you have to hold on to this dream. You have to go through a lot of fire and brimstone to get to, because there's no clear cut to getting to a dream. And sometimes a dream takes more than just a dream. It takes fate to push you to where you need to be, which is what the crux of my story is in that short little story. It's only 24 pages, but it encompasses a lot of information. So ultimately, I would love to see that animated. So trying to find someone to animate it or find a producer who would be willing to read the script has been like pulling teeth. So.
Well, it's an interesting, to your point, because it's a full circle to our whole conversation about the dream, becoming your dream, realizing your dreams. And yes, having read your script about just that. And when you as a teacher, an artist, a creative, a visionary, think about the little boy back in Illinois who had no connection, no real, like, how that would ever happen, just a fascination, and how it came into what it became. And if it went beyond your wildest dreams, and in addition, when people, assuming people seek you out, how did you get into this? How did you do this? How can I do this? What you say to people. And I don't know about you, but you just said it, and I say this all the time. There's no rhyme, no reason to how this comes and how this creates, and the guarantees and the hard works and the unknowns, and no matter what you got, all your tools in place, how that's going to play out. Do you feel, as you reflect, going back and then coming full forward to where you are today, do you feel like you have realized your dream beyond what you imagined? Do you feel fulfilled? Do you feel like there's more to do?
Well, I think as an artist, you're never totally satisfied. I think as an artist, anytime you're totally satisfied and feel that you can't go any further, I mean, even Dick Smith said this, then you as an artist no longer are an artist. So to me, am I totally fulfilled? No, because I keep pushing myself. I keep wanting more. And I think even on your deathbed, you're going to say, well, I didn't do this when I should have done. I didn't take this road when I should have taken this road. And as my husband would say, he would say, well, you're taking the road that you're meant to take. And the thing is the real challenge is taking that road and using that as a stepping stone and making that the right move. So we never, again, fate takes us on those side roads sometimes because maybe we're not quite ready for what we need to come next. And so it diverts us. It does a little detour. And then maybe I find most times in my life, things have always come full circle. So sometimes they don't come full circle immediately, but you give it time, and you have to be patient, because the world works on its own thing. And life is nothing but circles. We always come back and come back and come back to where we started. And hopefully by then we've learned something, and we can now go beyond that circle into a new circle. And that's, you have your circle of friends, you have your circle of family, you have your circle of work. Everything seems to be, if you think about it, is circles. And that's how life is.
Agreed. And it is about going back also to one's roots, both of us coming from farmland. and living on a farm. It's about planting seeds and knowing that, when you're harvesting a field, that some of that's going to get washed away by a rain or birds or
Right.
whatever, the elements. Some of it's going to harvest and turn into a category of actual fruit or food or what have you, and turn into something that's going to create abundance. And life is just like that in a secular way. And it really is about then having trust in the process, being open, ready, and willing and able, being fully prepared for what gets presented, and always being kind of in that readiness position to saying yes to the opportunity.
Well, and sometimes you also have to know when the opportunity isn't right and to say no. I mean, life is made of both, as I found, as a teacher, because of teaching at the professional level of college, because I've been a college professor, is learning how not to always derail when you're teaching a group of students, that sometimes they have to have failure. You don't want to always have everything as success. Failures, how you work with a failure and turn a failure into an asset, is probably better than having everything work out for you, because then you're going to think outside the box. You're going to say, how can I use this in a way? Many times, I'm sure people who are listening to this podcast, something happened in such a way that all of a sudden they came up with something better than what they would have done if it worked out right the first time. And life is failure, and how to use failure to your advantage. And that's a big thing that people have to learn.
It is. I think collectively as a world, I think the pandemic was one of those very integral moments of realization of it wasn't failure. It was, okay, options
Right.
are like, now what? How are you going to solve this situation? And I think coming into our realm, I think my observation has been, if you don't experience failure, not that you wish it upon anybody, but if people just keep going through their career, never having a hiccup, never, falling on their knees and having to get back up, they really aren't prepared for those moments. And I don't know that you can ever be prepared for those moments, but it really is then, how do you show up making decisions in those moments? And you're correct. Not everything is a yes. You have to know when things are a no, for whether it's because you're not being offered your value, or it's not the right time, or it takes you, like you said, off your path. But I definitely think that in my observation, there have been people who are like, well, that's never happened to me. That's not going to happen. One would hope that an actor doesn't wake up and say, I no longer want you as my makeup artist.
Sure.
Or that a production gets pulled because of budgetary reasons, or that because our business is not designed in a way that there are any guarantees. But we've also been in our career during a time that less and less guarantees in life.
Sure.
We've seen a change in the world and as a whole. Whereas when you and I first started, there were a lot more corporations and positions in the world that were available to people, where they stayed in a career for 30 years with their IRAs and their pensions and all those things. And though we're in an industry due to a union, because we're in a union, that we have these things, we still know that life is not guaranteed in any of these formulas, because we've lived enough where we're in that generation where we've seen it before us and what's happened since, and how it's affected those older than us and those younger than us. So it's an very interesting time of lots of transitions, a lot of change, a lot of all of that. And so I think that, I just love, first off, Brad, I just want to acknowledge you for who you are as an artist, who you are as a man, who you are as a contributor and a visionary and a creator, and your humility and your gift that we all are so fortunate to have. And I'm personally so thankful that when I first met you on Star Trek, as I was doing Mad TV and being invited to join you guys, to work with you guys, that I got exposed to you and continued to be exposed to you through things like Santa Claus 3 and Westworld and continued projects. I feel like I can't get enough of you. I feel like I can't be around you enough because conversations are always interesting. Insights are always interesting. I know you got very strong points of view, but I also know that you have a lot of just things to offer, but with respect to, in respect to, like, not there to just suck you dry, but in there to, like, you're always going to hear great things come out of your mouth. And I think that anybody who hasn't had the pleasure to work with you should clamor to work with you. And I think that you are a man who, in our realm of this career, is somebody who still has so much value to bring. And whether you're in every background tent and every project that has, opportunity to bring people on, you have to be a part of that team.
Well, thank you.
I know that you and I could continue to talk for hours on end, and there was a whole chunk of a lot of things that we didn't get to talk about. And I know that you have given me your 2 hours of time, so I want to respect that time. But I also would love to invite you back to do another podcast. And I love the fact that we got this opportunity to, like, hear about little Brad and how things developed and see where you are right now and that full circle. And I just want to thank you for your taking this time out of your day to be a part of and make me laugh. I was really, really, really trying not to laugh out loud because you are a funny, smart man. And I just can't wait for people to hear what you have to share.
Well, hopefully they find some of this insight interesting. Again, some of it's just life stories and some of it's just insights of life itself. I mean, again, that's, I guess, the most you can bring to any of this is your personal aspect and your insight. And everyone's going to have different insight, and that's part of being human. And hopefully someone will find this of interest or value to them that might help them in something that's going on in their life. I mean, again, the one thing that I found is having people who are interested and invested in you, as some of my teachers have been, has been probably the best things about my life, is having people who are willing to go that extra mile and help you out. And hopefully other people will do that for others, because let's face it, helping one another makes the world so much better.
It absolutely is true. And I always say my motto is our greatest bank account is each other. And the importance of connection and conversation is realizing how much we have in common versus how much we don't. And again, why I, years ago wanted to do this medium and this platform. And it took more life of things to get through to be able to do this. And the timing of it was such where, I love people. I love what, hearing what makes people tick. And I think that we, through our life experiences, do teach. And I think through our perspective can bring to the table value. And if it resonates with one or many, then we've done what we've, here to do, which is to educate and entertain and sit down and take a moment to when you're sitting around a campfire, that's what you do. You
Sure.
Sit around and listen to life stories and you get entertained and you connect. And we need that more than ever. So that's why I'm so grateful that you said yes to joining me here on my platform to uh, share your life experiences, and hopefully it lights other people up and makes them laugh and reflect the way it has for me. And I thank you so much.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you for having me on your program.
Was that not a great conversation of insight and perspective? We have so much to learn from one another if we just sit down, connect, and listen, and exchange thoughts and understand why some things are just what they are, such as the importance of being an artist and education, and how that opens doors to so many opportunities, and why seeking out and ever always expanding with one's passions can really lead to an amazing, successful, award-winning career like Brad looks. I'm so grateful that you joined me this week for part 2 of my conversation with Brad Look. I look forward to you joining me next week when I have the opportunity to sit down with author Delilah Olson, who authored this beautiful book called Fred the Monarch, and who is an administrator with Montessori School Systems up in Portland, Oregon. I look forward to you having a wonderful week, and please share, subscribe, and continue to listen to the Camp Fifi Uncensored podcast, where connection and conversation is our goal here, where the spirit is young, the soul is wise, and the life stories are vast. Bye for now.